So I grew up in North Beach, Chinatown area, and at that time the neighborhood was predominantly Italian, and we were one of the very first Chinese American families to move in there. So I grew up with a largely Sicilian kids I played with all the time. Chinatown in the old days was very different than the way it is today. It was a big community. In fact, our parents would know a lot of the shopkeepers, and so if you were naughty, it would get back to the family. And we were a little, village unto ourselves. There was very little interaction or contact with other communities. When I finally got into a more mixed bag population in the schools, I realized that white people didn't think or act like we did. We had a very different sense of humor, a different outlook, different values, all the way down the line. It was a great culture shock to me to come to the realization that not all people are like us, Asians. I just assumed everybody was kind of the same because I grew up with those values. My awareness of racism came at a very early age, and I remember things that my father would say to me. I was working for CBS News at one time, and I was very proud of it, and I told my father that I was going to be, covering the news on television. And instead of happy, it struck me that he felt very concerned for me and a bit worried. He said, "The white people are never going to let you get that far." At that time, there was not one Asian face in the news. Every newsroom was lily white. So we had to break open that industry. My short time in broadcast journalism happened when I was living in New York back in the early 70s. I was working for CBS News as a copy girl, and I had seen an ad saying that there was a program that was being offered in New York to train people of color to get into the industry. I researched it and actually applied and got into the program. That program had produced a lot of the first broadcasters of color, and not just in television, also in print journalism. When the story of Wounded Knee broke in 1973, they sent me out with a crew under cover of night, and I got in and I covered that story. But because of who I was and my great naivete at that time about how the political machinery works in a newsroom, in the media, I went out there and began my story with, "It's a good day to die." Quoting the American Indian and describing the physical phalanx of armored personnel carriers around the hamlet in Wounded Knee. To them, I think it made it look like it was going to be a massacre. They didn't like the way we were covering the story. The irony was that when I went back to New York, the president told me, "Maybe you should go into creative writing." And I thought about it, I said, yes, maybe I should. I think it would be an easier way for me to tell the truth than in the news. I was unwilling to make the kind of compromises that I would need to make to stay in that industry. When I came back to San Francisco, and I think at that point I became more serious in writing poetry. The poetry had always been there throughout middle school. I was writing some poetry. The time I lived in New York, I wrote a lot of poetry then and came back to San Francisco, and it was pretty much my hooking up with Kearney Street workshop that got me back into writing in a communal environment. Having gone through that experience in New York with CBS and feeling estranged and alone, coming back to San Francisco and working with the Kearney Street writers was very nurturing for me. So writing is a process of self-discovery and self-exploration. It has to arise organically in my subconscious. And then I try to find a way to articulate it in order to understand it. And if I can understand what I'm feeling for myself, I'm thinking other people can understand what I'm feeling too. So I think what I'm trying to do is connect with other people when I'm writing. And I think my experience as a woman of color has a particular connection for other women of color experiencing, regardless of the generational difference. We all share a lot of the same experiences in our lives, dealing with sexism, dealing with the patriarchy within our communities, and dealing with classism. Those are some of the things I grapple with and try to understand why I have such strong feelings of anguish when I think about the injustice. I not only want to confirm and celebrate my community, I also want to challenge fellow artists in my community and fellow people of color in my community that we can think bigger, we can act bigger, and we can be better than simply existing, simply achieving success, simply gaining status and approval and wealth and political power in our community. But that's not enough. Once you achieve that, you bought into that hierarchy, and then you start replicating all the capitalistic values. How is that life you're leading helping the rest of the people who are left behind, the people in the margins? I think it's time to transform those systems. We have to change that hierarchical way of doing things so that everything is more consensual, everything is more inclusive. We all have achieved what we have on the shoulders of our predecessors. There's so many more opportunities today. We didn't have those opportunities. We really had to fight to get for any kind of visibility at all. And so what I want young people to realize is that you only got this not by your own steam. You only got this because you did it on the shoulders of the people that couldn't do it, but fought for it so that our children could have these opportunities. The advice I would give for the next generation of artists, especially Asian American artists, is to never forget the ones you leave behind. And that's not just, your family, but the community members. There's never that total satisfaction. It's because you have to give something back to that community. You have to keep struggling and resisting all the contradictions that you see. And when you have that power, that ability, other people don't have. It's how you use your authority and your power that counts. It's not that you have it. It's what you do with it.